Welcome to the West Ham Voice and thank you for joining me. If you're new to the channel, please do hit the like button, the subscribe button and the bell notification to let you know when I'm next on. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thank you so much. Your subscriptions really do me a massive favour in boosting the channel. So on Thursday, I did a video talking about the first team coach, Paul Nevin, leaving West Ham United. And now I'm going to cover all the rumours, or as many of the rumours as I can, about the supposed mass exodus of players at West Ham. So first we've got all the coaches leaving, and now apparently we've got a whole load of players leaving. Now, I'm not talking about the Declan Rice transfer. We know that that's virtually done and dusted. And frankly, thank goodness for that. We can now proceed with our own transfer plans as to who we will be bringing into the club. However, apparently, Rice isn't the only player apparently leaving. Over the past few weeks, we've been hearing about how a whole host of players are about to depart. Now, dependent on what social media, what press columns you read, and not to mention the ITKs that you want to believe, we've got Alphonse Areola, Ben Johnson, Thilo Kehrer, Flynn Downs, Connor Coventry, Thomas Soucek, Pablo Fornals, Jared Bowen, Said Benrahma, Michail Antonio, Danny Ings, Gianluca Scamacca, and Lucas Paqueta, all leaving the club this summer. That would be on top of Manuel Lanzini, who's already left, and Rice, who is imminently leaving, making a grand total of 15 players apparently leaving West Ham United this summer. 15 players. And what are we going to do? Now, look, we all know that this is far from the truth. Unless we're absolutely desperate for money, or unless those in power at the club have received a damaging kick to the head, or unless whoever's in charge has decided that last season's European glory simply wasn't good enough and that there has to be a mass clear out of players, then we're not really going to lose 15 players in one summer transfer window. It's just not practical. It's just not going to happen. You see, last summer was the revolution in our squad when we brought 8 new players in. This summer is going to be more about an evolution of squad rotation, where we'll see a tweaking of the squad rather than another spell of wholesale changes. So, who really is likely to be leaving this summer? Well, first of all, let's look at the players of the players listed. Apart from Declan Rice, 5 are in the last year of their contracts. They are Ben Johnson, Connor Coventry, Thomas Soucek, Pablo Fornals, and Michail Antonio. They've all got a year left. Now, some of them have got options of extending for a year or two, but in general, at this moment in time, they've all got a year left on their contracts. So I can see why there may be substance to some of these stories about players leaving. But to be honest with you, as we have seen with Declan Rice, I think, if the right offer comes in for any player, whether they're on this list or not, then there's always a chance of them leaving West Ham United. But as I said, all of them leaving at once, I doubt it. So let's run through them briefly and talk about each player and see where we really stand with whether they're going to leave or not. And let's start, of course, with Alphonse Areola. Now, look, by rights, he should be our #1 keeper for next season. Whilst Lucas Fabianski has been amazing for us, he is now 38 years of age, and he'll be 39 when the next season draws to an end. If Areola isn't the first choice keeper next season, then it would not surprise me if the player himself would want to push for a move this summer. He's also got his international career to consider, and he would have hoped that he would have made the step up to possibly being the #1 French goalie after Hugo Lloris hung up his international boot, or at the very least being second in line for the keeper's shirt. But what's really happened is he's got other goalies that have sort of overtaken him because of his lack of playing time, and he's still third choice keeper for his French national squad. Will he leave? I don't think he will. I think he will get that guarantee of being first choice keeper next season. But like I said, if it proves that he isn't, then at the very least, he might want to decide that he wants to move in January rather than in the summer. Next up, Ben Johnson is a player that who is most likely to leave. At the beginning of last year, West Ham offered Johnson a 6.5-year contract, which he turned down. Johnson wanted to negotiate a deal till 2026, but it's believed that the salary terms and the length of the contract were not favourable. Negotiations reached an impasse, so the club triggered the automatic 2-year extension on his contract, which keeps him here till 2024. 23-year-old Johnson believes he should be paid a salary commensurate to what other players in the senior squad are already being paid. Now, that in itself, I guess, is fair. The season before last, he had a very good season. Last season, not so good. But where Johnson's form was superb, it is now questionable. So is he worthy of a 60 grand a week salary to sort of bring him in on par with other players in the senior squad? It's debatable. Look, Johnson apparently is on about 30 grand a week at the moment, plus bonuses. He's a lifelong West Ham fan. He's been with the club since the age of 7. I would love to think that something can be agreed with the player, but as time passes by, it seems more likely that he will move on this summer. Let's go to Thilo Kehrer. Now, he recently said in an interview that he would not rule out a return to Germany one day. This then got picked up by an agent who then spoke to reporters, journalists, who then wrote the story that there's a chance that Kehrer could be set to leave this summer and make his return to Germany after just 1 year with West Ham United. Now, if you look at the outline of the story, it's not factually incorrect. And I hope you don't think I'm suggesting that any of the journalists that wrote the story are misleading us in any way. So it's not an attempt to bash any journalists who've reported it. But I think the comment from Kehrer has been taken a little bit out of context. Let me try and explain. How many years ago did we first hear that one day Manuel Lanzini would want to return to his boyhood club, River Plate in Argentina? Now, up until the end of June, Lanzini had been with West Ham for 7 years. And I swear the first time I heard him talk about his desire to return to Argentina was at the very least 4 years ago. But I dare say some of you may remember that he said that even longer than that. So I don't read too much into the comment that Kehrer made, suggesting that he wouldn't rule out a return to Germany. Of course he would. After all, it's where he was born and raised. He plays for the national team. And before moving to PSG in 2018, he spent his whole youth career and senior playing career in Germany. So it would not be out of place for the player to say that he would not rule out a return to Germany at some point. But I cannot see this happening this summer. And why would it? He signed a 4-year deal with West Ham with an option of a 2-year extension. And despite having some difficulties last season in his first season with us, I think he finished in a quite strong position. And I can only see him getting better in the season ahead. So that one, no, I don't think there's much mileage in Kehrer leaving. What about Flynn Downs? Well, despite probably not getting as much game time as he may have hoped in his first season at West Ham, Flynn Downs hasn't really let West Ham down every time he's been called upon. In a busy season, he made 35 appearances, and I believe he kind of held his own in both the Premier League and Europa Conference League as well. Look, he's 24 years of age, and after his first season in the Premier League, the big question is whether he can make a case for becoming a regular feature in the first team at West Ham, or he's not necessarily, well, he's not by any least a replacement for Declan Rice, but he's a solid footballer who's won a lot of praise for his performances, as well as the clubs that he's played for before. The recent link to Southampton comes from the fact that former Swansea manager Russell Martin is now in charge at Southampton. And of course, Martin managed Downs at Swansea. Martin thinks very highly of the player, and it won't be of any surprise if he would want to team up with Downs again in order to help him get Southampton promoted back into the Premier League at first attempt. But I guess that's the question is, should Southampton get promoted, are they going to end up being a team who are going to be forever struggling in the bottom half of the Premier League? If that's the case, then is Downs a good enough player that can help elevate West Ham to the top half of the league? Or would Championship and maybe the bottom half of the Premier League prove to be his level. Should we be looking for a better caliber of player? Well, there has, of course, also been talk of a cash plus player swap deal involving Downs and James Ward-Prowse, who we know is a favourite of David Moyes, and he was a transfer target a few years ago. However, Ward-Prowse, currently 28 years of age, at £30 million, is considered maybe not the right fit for a Steiden type of player in the future West Ham. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, and perhaps a compromise would be maybe a loan swap deal for a season. But both players still have long contracts at their respective clubs. So I would imagine that Martin would want transfer funds to help build the squad in order to give Southampton a better chance of getting promoted at first attempt rather than loaning players out. So maybe a swap deal might be in place there. Next up, Thomas Souček. Now, beginning of last season, he wanted an improved contract, just like Ben Johnson, but he didn't manage to secure one. There were many stories bandied around that Souček was being touted around to clubs to see if anyone would be interested in buying him. The links to Amadou Onana were strong, but Onana wanted assurances that he would be a regular starter if he went to West Ham. With Souček gone, it would have been easier to have given him that assurance. But because Souček stayed, and now he's got 1 year left on his contract with a club, with an option of an extended further year, Onana didn't come to West Ham. Look, I think if a club came in with a reasonable offer of, say, £20 million maybe for Souček, we would take it and allow him to leave. A potential replacement for him would be the player I've just mentioned, James Ward-Prowse. Both the same age, but Ward-Prowse would have much more of a goal threat in him. So don't be surprised if Souček was one of the players that left this summer. Next up is Pablo Fornals. Again, another player in his last year of his contract. And it's understandable that perhaps West Ham might want to cash in on the 27-year-old midfielder. There are rumours that Juventus are lining him up as a potential replacement for Paul Pogba. And there's also talk that he could become part of a swap deal for defensive midfielder Denis Zakaria, who we've been linked with. Now, Fornals' current contract does not have an option to extend it. But with the departure of both Rice and Lanzini, I'm not so sure that West Ham will want to let Fornals go. He had an emotional season last season, didn't he, where he admitted that not playing enough had affected him. The man bleeds claret and blue, but sentiment is never enough to keep a player at a club. However, with Fornals, it goes beyond sentiment. He'd be a damn good player, and he's a damn good player. And despite his limited chances last season, he still managed to smash in 7 goals, including that all-important winner in the semi-finals against Alkmaar. I think he'll be better off playing in midfield. I think many of us believe that that's the best position for him. And so I think quite possibly he will be offered an extended contract at the club. Like I said, the only maybe downside to that is perhaps if there's a swap deal going on for Zakaria, maybe. But we're looking at bringing Zakaria in as on a loan deal. So maybe I think Fornals will stay. Next up, what of Jarrod Bowen? After a poor start to the season, Bowen finished quite strongly. And it's no surprise that other clubs are sniffing around him. There's been rumours about Newcastle looking at him and so on and so forth. However, it looks like Bowen is about to become one of the best paid players at West Ham with an extended contract offer. He's also happily settled, isn't he, with Danny Dyer, his young family, etc. So I think, yes, of course, all our good players will always be looked at by other clubs. But I think Bowen won't be leaving anytime soon. And then, of course, we come to Lucas Paqueta. Now, I mentioned in the show last week that Paqueta was one of 3 players who was supposedly unhappy under David Moyes. The other was Bowen. The other was Souček. I said then, and I repeat, I can't corroborate that. It's what I was told, but I can't corroborate that that's a true story. I also said that he'd acquired a new agent. And now I know that this agent is British European based and actually a lot closer to home than we think. Look, up until now, he'd been with agency Brazil Zoca. Brazil Soccer have done well by Paqueta, and he too from them. They managed to get him his first big money move to Europe in 2019 when he went from Brazilian club Flamengo to AC Milan for a fee of £35 million. Just a year later, when that move didn't quite work out, he went to French club Lyon in a £21 million move. And then, of course, 2 years on, he arrived at West Ham in a bumper £40 million deal, which includes £11 million of add-ons. His new agent hasn't been publicly announced yet, and I can't get an answer as to why. If you recall, when Gianluca Scamacca signed to a new agency, CAA Stella, they made sure that everybody knew about it by promoting it pretty hard. I know the notice of a new agency comes at a time when there are rumours that other clubs are interested in Paqueta. Now, as always happens, like I said a moment ago about Bowen, whenever a player has a decent season, there are always other teams sniffing around. And at the moment, there's talk that both Newcastle and PSG are interested in Paqueta. But here's the thing. Both these clubs were apparently interested in Paqueta last summer as well, but neither of them made any move to sign the player. It has been suggested that if we were to sell Paqueta, it would have to be a very special deal of around about £80 million. But that has since been followed up by the club saying the player is not for sale. Do I think there's interest in Paqueta? Undoubtedly. He has proven to be an excellent player. He's a Brazilian international. You don't get into that national team if you're average. Do I think Paqueta will leave this summer? No. Despite my concerns over him getting a new agency, I don't think he will leave. The West Ham players will know of Tim Steiden's caliber, and I would imagine a player like Paqueta will be excited to see who Steiden can bring to the club next season. So I think he'll hang around to see how things will develop. Next up is which of our three strikers will leave. As things go, an offer of around £10 million for either Antonio or Danny Ings will ensure the departure of one of or both of these players. We've heard that Antonio apparently has been linked with, I think it's Galatasaray, but we've been told that there's no truth in that rumour at all. Look, it goes without saying that Ings cannot fit into the Moyes system, and there is loose talk that there may be a cash and player deal for Ings to go to Leicester and for Harvey Barnes to come to West Ham United. Now, that would make a lot of sense. Ings would be an ideal player for Leicester to get those vital goals to elevate them back to the Premier League at first attempt. So watch this space on that. As for Antonio, well, we're all too aware that he'd been pushing for a move back in January. And from my understanding, at the age of 33, Antonio wants one last lucrative contract, at least for another maybe 2 or 3 years, with an improved salary of something like £120,000 a week. He's already on 100 grand a week at West Ham. Realistic? I don't think so. At 33, I don't know. But let's see what pans out. Certainly, I don't think he'll get that sort of money. Well, maybe he would. Maybe there is a club in the Premier League that might want to pay for it. Quite likely, maybe a club in the Championship might want him, but they're not going to pay that sort of salary. And finally, what of the consistent rumours that Gianluca Scamacca is due to return to Italy? Look, in reality, the only way that this is going to happen is if an Italian club offers £35 million for the player, and judging by how things are going in Italy, not that many teams there, if any, can afford to buy Scamacca for that money. West Ham will not entertain the player going out on loan, as we need the money to bring in a replacement for the club. West Ham also want to give Scamacca every opportunity to succeed at the club and feel that he will vastly improve next season. So, Lanzini's gone. Declan Rice is just about gone. And to conclude, there could be anything up to another 13 players going. But in reality, come on, let's be honest, that really isn't going to happen. I think possibly, as I said, you may see Johnson go. Maybe Downs will go. Possibly Souček. And 1 or 2 of our strikers. That could mean, with Lanzini and Rice, we could lose 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players maybe. Now, of those, 4 or 5 are regarded as homegrown, meaning that we'll only have 4 or 5 players left in next season's squad who will be classed as homegrown players. Creswell, Antonio, and/or Ings, Bowen and Connor Coventry. Therefore, it's more than likely that West Ham will be looking at the domestic market for potential replacements. And we're likely to get maybe, I think, 4, possibly 5 signings. We're not going to get like for like as we did last summer. You know, we may lose more players this summer than we will get in. So I can't see any more than 4, possibly 5 players coming into West Ham. And those will be probably 2 defensive roles, 2 midfield roles, and an attacking role. So who's on the radar? Well, these aren't any new stories. These are stories that have been bandied around for quite some time. First up, Max Aarons, the exciting 23-year-old right back who's got a year left on his contract with Norwich City and is worth between 15, 20 million pounds. I've already mentioned James Ward-Prowse, 28 years of age, central midfielder at Southampton. We've apparently valued him at 20 million pounds, which is rather cheeky, but there's no way Southampton are going to let him go for that sort of money. But there, as I said, there could be some kind of deal that would involve Flynn Downs going the other direction. And then, of course, Harvey Barnes, 25-year-old attacking winger, who's contracted at Leicester for a further 2 years, valued at around 35 million pounds. But again, as I said, if we can do something with Danny Ings, that might bring that value down a little bit with Ings going the other way. And then, of course, there's Denis Zakaria, the 26-year-old defensive midfielder at Juventus, who was on loan last season at Chelsea. His value is at around 17 to 20 million pounds. And West Ham, as I've said already, are rumoured to be brokering a loan deal with an option to buy. And finally, Daniel Ballard, the 23-year-old versatile centre-back who is contracted at Sunderland till 2025, who could also play as a defensive midfielder, and his value is circa 5 million, but I would guess Sunderland would want a little bit more than that. Look, some of these names are not that inspiring, are they? But I think you can see from there, apart from one of those players, the other 4 are homegrown. So you're going to boost up the homegrown numbers, get that up. But it's a good mix, really. You've got experience there in a player like Ward-Prowse. You've got an exciting prospect like Aarons, like Ballard. You've got other exciting prospects like Zakaria. You know, it could be, and Harvey Barnes as well, of course. So it could be a good mix. If we had a transfer market of maybe these 4 or 5 of these players, would it be so bad? You've got cover, a young cover for central defence with Ballard. You've got a good cover at right back with Max Aarons. So you strengthen your defence and lowering the average age of the squad. You know, we all know about Barnes, good, decent player, gives us attacking options. On the left-hand side, but also down the flanks, you know, with Ben Rama and other players, etc. And then Ward-Prowse will bring that bit of experience. I know not a lot of fans would fancy Ward-Prowse, but in all honesty, he will bring goals. You know, he's good at set pieces, etc. So it's a good mix. You know, and my understanding is that these are the 5 players that are preferred at the moment. There are other players as well that have been rumoured to be linked to us, and I'll do another show next week to discuss those. Now, all that aside, there is, of course, the story that broke the other day. I think it was Gonzo who broke it on Hammers Chat Forum about Alex Scott. Look, I've heard about the story suggesting that David Moyes has sabotaged any deal for Alex Scott. Now, I've asked around and I haven't managed to get any word whether the rumour is true or not. But I like the way Gio talked about the situation, in which he said that he doesn't dispute that someone has shared information of a meeting that was meant to have happened, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the meeting itself did happen, or if it did, that it went in the way that it was told. Look, for those who are not aware of the story, apparently Alex Scott and his representatives, thought to have included his dad, met with David Moyes, Mark Noble and Tim Steidten to talk about a possible move to West Ham United. Apparently, Moyes was frosty during the meeting and could not or would not guarantee Scott any game time in the first team when asked, to which Scott decided that he didn't want to come to West Ham. Now, we have heard these stories before about Moyes doing the same thing with previous transfer targets, so it's plausible. If it really did happen, then I would imagine action would be taken over David Moyes and his attitude, as I cannot imagine Steiden wanting to work under an environment where he's undermined by Moyes. It would just make Steiden's role extremely difficult. Remember the video I did the other week asking how Steiden would work with Moyes? Anyway, whether the meeting did or didn't happen, the detail was given that the detail that was given seemed to suggest that the person who relayed the story was either in the meeting room itself or had direct access to someone who was. And given that the story was leaked from the West Ham side, that can only mean that it came from either Moyes, Steiden, or Noble. Now, of course, such a story, look, Moyes, highly unlikely, doesn't speak to the press, let alone anyone else. Steiden, he's only just joined. I don't want to put the spotlight on Noble, and I think it'll be unfair to do so. Of course, such a story creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of unrest amongst the fans, gets them really angry. But as I already said, the story itself has not been corroborated. Anyway, let's see how things develop with all transfer links over the coming weeks. I'm sure things will start happening soon, and I know fans are anxious. And but let me put you to mind at rest. We're not losing 15 players this summer. There's no way. Yes, there will be players leaving without a shadow of a doubt. I don't dispute that. How many? Maybe, as I said, maybe 6 or 7 in total, which includes Lanzini and includes Rice as well. So look out for all the latest stories that are coming out. When I get them, I'll bring them to you. Thank you all for watching. Like I said, if you're new to the channel, please do hit the subscribe, like, and bell notification to let you know when I'm next on. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.